Number 1. Orpheus Pledger. Orpheus Pledger was a rising star. From early roles on Neighbors and Silver Sun as a child, to playing Mason Morgan on Home and Away from 2016 to 2019, he seemed destined for fame. He was young, talented, and carried promise in every frame. But behind the spotlight, something had begun to unravel. As Pledger's career progressed, his personal life was quietly drifting apart. Friends and colleagues say the pressure of missed opportunities, especially missing out on a role in the U.S., weighed on him. Around that same time, his drug use escalated and mental health began to fray. Small cracks were forming. Then came the night of March 1st, 2024. In the early hours, Pledger attacked the woman who had been close to him. The confrontation was sparked by concerns she raised about his drug habits and increasingly erratic behavior. What began with words quickly turned violent. He kicked and punched her in the face. Weeks later, on March 25th, the violence escalated. At approximately 1:35 a.m., the same woman called for help. She feared a mental health crisis was underway. When police later arrived, they found her lying motionless, badly injured, bruises, cuts, injuries to her neck and face, and the imprint of a shoe sole on her cheek. In that same night, Pledger dragged her by the hair and stomped on her. The fallout was immediate. Police issued arrest warrants after Pledger failed to show up in court and fled from a hospital, where he was awaiting a mental health assessment. A manhunt followed. He was arrested and remanded in custody. When the case came to court, Pledger pleaded guilty. Witnesses spoke of a former actor now consumed by substance abuse and tormented by mental health challenges. The judge was clear: drug-affected states could be taken into account, but they were no excuse for violence. The brutality of the acts, the victim's suffering, and the breach of trust demanded accountability. In August of 2024, he was sentenced to 7 months in jail. The judge noted troubling features, like a lack of remorse, attempts to shift blame, and a failure to fully acknowledge the hurt caused. But that sentence was appealed. In November, the legal decision was revised. Pledger's time already spent in custody, 97 days, would count, and his punishment shifted to a 2-year community corrections order, plus unpaid work and mandatory rehabilitation. But his troubles didn't end there. He violated the conditions of that correction order, failing drug tests, missing appointments, and even going back to the victim's home when legally ordered to stay away. In September 2025, the court found that Pledger had wasted the chance to turn his life around. The community corrections order was revoked, and he was resentenced to 6 months behind bars, with some credit for time already served. Number 2. Kevin Guthrie. Kevin Guthrie was a familiar face in British cinema. Born in Glasgow, Scotland, he rose through theater before landing breakout roles in films like Sunshine on Leith and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. He was talented, well-spoken, and respected for his discipline, the kind of actor who looked destined for long-term success. But in 2021, that rising career came to an abrupt and devastating halt. It began with a night out in Glasgow in 2017. Kevin and a friend went to assist a woman who had reportedly fallen ill after meeting with others earlier that evening. The woman said she believed she was being taken somewhere safe. But according to court testimony, once inside the flat, she was attacked. She later told police that while one man stayed in another room, Guthrie S.A. her as she lay out of it. Kevin denied the allegations. He said he had only helped the woman, that he'd offered comfort and a glass of water. But forensic evidence and testimony told a different story. Investigators found his DNA on the victim's clothing. The prosecution described his actions as an opportunistic S.A. on a vulnerable woman who trusted him. The trial took place in Glasgow Sheriff Court in 2021. After several days of evidence and testimony, Guthrie was found guilty. The verdict shocked the film community. This was a man who had appeared in blockbuster franchises, now convicted of a serious crime. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison and ordered him to register as a SO for 10 years. He called Guthrie's behavior a breach of trust and said the actor had shown no genuine remorse. In prison, Guthrie's career collapsed overnight. His role in upcoming projects was erased, production companies distanced themselves immediately, and his name disappeared from credits. Fans who once knew him as a rising talent now associated him only with the crime. After serving roughly half of his sentence, Guthrie was released in late 2022 under supervision, a standard procedure for Scottish prisons. But the damage to his reputation was permanent. Offers dried up. The industry moved on. Today, Kevin Guthrie lives quietly, away from the public eye. The man once set to become one of Scotland's most successful actors remains a reminder of how quickly a career built on promise can disintegrate when fame collides with actions that can't be undone. Number 3. Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes was one of Hollywood's biggest names in the 1990s. Charismatic, powerful, and effortlessly cool, he was the action star of a generation. From New Jack City to Demolition Man, and later the Blade trilogy, Snipes carved out an image of unstoppable confidence. On screen, he was always in control. But off-screen, his battle wasn't with villains. It was with the U.S. government. It started quietly, long before anyone noticed. During the height of his fame, Snipes was earning millions per film. But between 1999 and 2004, he stopped filing federal income tax returns altogether. The reason, according to prosecutors, was a belief that he didn't legally owe taxes, a claim based on arguments promoted by so-called tax protester groups. For years, Snipes' finances went unchecked. He was working, earning, spending, while behind the scenes, unpaid taxes were stacking up to millions of dollars. The IRS began investigating, and what they found was staggering: more than $7 million in unpaid taxes across multiple years. In 2006, federal prosecutors filed charges. Snipes was accused of conspiracy to defraud the United States and willful failure to file tax returns. It was a shocking fall, one of Hollywood's top earners now facing serious prison time. At trial, Snipes claimed he had been misled by financial advisors who convinced him the tax system didn't apply to him. His defense argued he had acted on bad advice, not criminal intent. But the evidence was overwhelming. Years of unfiled returns, ignored warnings, and correspondence that showed he'd been told repeatedly what the law required. In 2008, Wesley Snipes was convicted on 3 misdemeanor counts of failing to file tax returns. The judge called his actions a history of contempt for the law. Snipes was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, the maximum allowed for the charges. He began serving his sentence in December 2010 at a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. For a man once used to movie sets and red carpets, life behind bars was a stark contrast. He kept a low profile, reportedly teaching fitness and meditation classes to other inmates. After serving 2.5 years, Snipes was released in 2013 and placed under home confinement. When he returned to Hollywood, he did so quietly, appearing in smaller projects and interviews that reflected on his past. He called his prison experience humbling, saying it gave him a new perspective on discipline and freedom. Number 4. Ricardo Medina Jr. In the early 2000s, Ricardo Medina Jr. was a face millions of kids recognized. He was the Red Ranger, the fearless leader in Power Rangers Wild Force. Charismatic, fit, and confident, Medina seemed destined for a long career in Hollywood. But behind the camera, his story would take a violent and tragic turn, one that would end in bloodshed, a prison sentence, and the end of his career. Ricardo's journey started like many young actors in Los Angeles. After his breakout role as Cole Evans, the Red Ranger, in 2002, he became a convention favorite and even returned to the franchise in Power Rangers Samurai nearly a decade later. But when the spotlight faded, work slowed. By 2015, Medina was living in a small apartment in Palmdale, California, with his roommate and friend, Josh Sutter. What happened next would shock fans around the world. On January 31st, 2015, police received a frantic 911 call. When officers arrived at Medina's apartment, they found Josh Sutter bleeding heavily from stab wounds. Medina was still there, and he was the one who had called for help. According to police, the two men had argued over Medina's girlfriend. The argument turned physical, and Medina retreated into his bedroom, locking the door. But when Sutter forced his way inside, Medina grabbed a samurai sword, the very type of weapon that had defined his on-screen persona. In a single motion, he plunged the blade into Sutter's abdomen, fatally wounding him. Medina told police it was self-defense. He claimed he feared for his life. But investigators questioned the extent of force used and whether the killing had crossed the line from defensive to deliberate. Initially, the case seemed uncertain. Medina was released without charges after the first investigation. But a year later, in January 2016, prosecutors filed a new case, charging him with murder. If convicted, he faced 26 years to life in prison. The trial drew national attention, not just because of who he was, but how he had killed. The irony of a former Power Ranger using a sword to end a life became a dark headline in itself. After months of negotiation, Medina accepted a plea deal in March 2017. He pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, admitting that he stabbed Sutter during a heated argument. The court sentenced him to 6 years in state prison. Medina served time at the California Department of Corrections. During his sentence, he expressed remorse for the killing, calling it a horrible accident and saying he wished he could take it back. He was released in 2020 after serving his term. But the world he returned to was not the same. Hollywood moved on. His reputation was shattered. Once the heroic Red Ranger Ricardo Medina Jr. became a tragic reminder of how fame can crumble and how one moment of rage can destroy everything that came before it. Number 5. Joe Sun. Joe Sun played the quirky henchman Random Task in Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, a parody of James Bond's Odd Job, known for killing enemies with a shoe instead of a hat. But behind the comedy and cult fame, actor Joe Sun was hiding one of the darkest secrets in Hollywood history, a crime so brutal it would take nearly 2 decades to uncover. In the late 1990s, Joe Sun was on the rise. A former mixed martial artist turned actor, he appeared in Austin Powers in 1997, a film that went on to become a comedy classic. Fans loved his bizarre humor and strange presence on screen. But his time in Hollywood didn't last long. After a few low-budget film appearances and a brief, unsuccessful MMA career, Sun seemed to vanish from the spotlight. No one knew that behind the scenes, his past was about to catch up to him, in a way no one could have imagined. The story traces back to Christmas Eve 1990, 7 years before Austin Powers was even filmed. That night, a woman was walking her dog in California when she was abducted by 2 men. She was beaten, tortured, and assaulted repeatedly before being released, blindfolded, and left for dead. Despite a detailed report and DNA evidence being collected, the attackers were never identified. For over 15 years, the case went cold, until 2008 when Joe Sun was arrested for an unrelated charge, a probation violation. During booking, police took a DNA sample. It was standard procedure. But when that DNA was entered into the system, it triggered a match to the unsolved 1990 abduction case. The quirky Austin Powers actor was suddenly facing charges for one of the most violent crimes in California's history. In 2011, Joe Sun was convicted of torture and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, the disturbing details resurfaced: the prolonged attack, the psychological torment, and the complete lack of remorse. But the story didn't end there. In 2017, while serving his sentence, Joe Sun was accused of murdering his cellmate, a convicted sex offender named Michael Graham. Sun was charged again, this time with second-degree murder, accused of beating his cellmate to death inside the cell they shared. The once laughable sidekick from a comedy classic became a symbol of pure horror, a man who hid his true nature behind a Hollywood smile. Joe Sun remains incarcerated in California, serving life without parole. His acting career and any trace of comedic legacy are gone, erased by the brutality of his crimes. Number 6. Ryan Grantham. Ryan Grantham was a rising young actor who seemed to have everything going for him. He appeared in hit shows like Supernatural, Riverdale, and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, earning a reputation as a talented, reliable performer. To most people, he was just another familiar face from Canadian television. But behind that image, Ryan's life was quietly unraveling. By 2020, at just 21 years old, Grantham's mental health had sharply declined. He had dropped out of college, withdrawn from friends, and become increasingly isolated. His diary entries from that time showed disturbing thoughts, self hatred, and growing paranoia. He began obsessively planning something unthinkable. On March 31st, 2020, Ryan Grantham picked up a gun in his home in Squamish, British Columbia. Inside the house was his mother, Barbara Waite, who had always supported his acting career. As she played piano, Ryan walked up behind her and shot her in the back of the head. She died instantly. Later, he set up a camera and recorded a confession, calmly explaining what he had done. But the story didn't end there. The next day, Grantham loaded his car with 3 guns, ammunition, Molotov cocktails, camping gear, and a printed map leading to the home of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. His plan, according to his own words, was to continue his rampage by killing the Prime Minister. He drove for hours toward Ottawa before stopping in Hope, British Columbia. There, he changed his mind. Instead of going through with the plan, he turned himself in at a Vancouver police station, telling officers, "I killed my mother." The investigation uncovered a detailed account of his mindset leading up to the murder. Prosecutors described a spiral of self-loathing and hopelessness. Ryan had rehearsed the act multiple times and filmed his mother's body afterward, expressing regret but also detachment. In 2022, Ryan Grantham pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The court sentenced him to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 14 years. During sentencing, his sister delivered a heartbreaking statement, saying she'd lost not only her mother but her brother as well. The story stunned Canada, a young, successful actor whose life had descended into tragedy and violence. Interviews and online discussions that once focused on his acting now centered on the haunting question: how does someone go from playing a teenage student on Riverdale to committing an act of real-life horror? Today, Ryan Grantham remains behind bars, reportedly undergoing therapy and psychiatric treatment. But for many, his name will forever be linked to one of the most disturbing crimes in Canadian entertainment history. A chilling reminder that fame doesn't always reveal what's happening beneath the surface.